right? 1 Samuel 26. Let's call this one Unbelievable and subtitle it Saul's Belly 2, because we have talked before about the way in which Saul's appetites and his pursuit of the things in his appetites, previously vengeance against the Philistines, this time eradicating a perceived threat in David, is going to lead him back into trouble. Understanding David has spared his life in chapter 24. This time he's going to do it again because Saul is getting into a pattern of behavior that is quite simply self-destructive. And it reminded me of a video seen before about a man who calls himself, I think, the Cheetah Whisperer. I'll try to link it. But it shows him showing the predatory nature of certain big cats. And he's going to compare cheetahs to leopards. It's going to show how he can actually sleep in a cheetah enclosure without threat of cheetahs that he's familiar with attacking him and making a meal out of him. But he won't even get into the cage with leopards and turn his back, because he will show you in the video how just sitting outside the bars of the cage, leopards that he was only petting a moment ago, once they get a chance to see him simply turn his back, their prey drive kicks in. And these leopards that had seemed to be his friend now look at him as a potential meal, illustrating the difference between certain big cats. Not necessarily saying that leopards are any more sinister than cheetahs, because he said size matters. The fact that he is much larger in comparison to a cheetah has a lot to do with the fact that they don't as quickly see him as prey. But either way, he's illustrating a tendency that the Bible warns about generally within humanity that we are now seeing Saul fall into, and that is, as Paul laments, the times in which our God can become our belly. And that seems to be the trap that Saul has fallen into, as quite simply that phrase from Paul seems to mean the times in which we are simply obsessed with what we want, fixating on it to the point where we can't really see enough of what's around us to see the times in which we are stumbling into danger. And that's exactly what Saul does here. Because once again, now that he's no longer under the threat of dying, as we mentioned before, in the previous instance where David spared Saul's life, we said that it's quite likely that his wicked counselors realized that all they had to do was give Saul a little bit of time before he was once again willing to listen to them tell him whatever it was he wanted to hear. And by now they had to know that he wanted to hear words that gave him permission to go hunt David again. So much like those cheetahs that could not be trusted once their caretaker turned his back on them, even though David had shown Saul mercy, as soon as David seemed vulnerable again, it seems that Saul has drifted so far away from reason that he is no longer thinking as a man, but he is reacting according to his appetites, much like not only Paul laments in his letter to the Philippians, but Peter is going to say in his second epistle at verse 12 of chapter 2, but these like irrational animals, creatures of instinct, born to be caught and destroyed, blaspheme about matters of which they are ignorant. They will also be destroyed in their destruction, suffering wrong as the wage for their wrongdoing, which seems to be so similar to what we see Saul doing here. So narrowly fixated on what he wants that he can't see the way in which he continues to walk back into danger, which is why we often say, God's best to you as you go forward in him, allowing God to steer us away from situations in which we can be so fixated on what we want that we can ultimately become unbelievably self-destructive.